Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with composer Jerskin Fendrix, who is nominated for an Oscar for his score on Poor Things. Jerskin, Yorgos Lanthimos has never commissioned a score or original music for any of his previous films, and you'd never written a score for a film before. So how did this unlikely partnership form?
Yeah, that's true. I think it worked out well that way. I like the fact that we were both new to it. There was a kind of, kind of flirty coyness to the whole process, and both of us didn't really know what we were doing, and it was very sweet. Um, yeah, it's odd. I mean, the way in which it was framed was that Yorgos had listened to an album I released, which was pop songs, basically, weird ones, but I think by definition, pop songs in lockdown. And um, I discussed it with him, and I think we had real common ground on how like humor is used in art, different ways of portraying emotions, stuff like that. Just I think there is actually a good deal of overlap in how we feel is the best way of communicating these sort of human ideas.
And then you get an Oscar nomination for your first score. What was that like?
I think if you ask me in a few months, I'll have a better answer. At this point, it's still a bit bizarre. My favorite part about it is that a huge number of my colleagues, everyone who worked on the film got, there was a lot of recognition there, and so much of this process involved, collaborative work and, people being inspired by other people's ideas. I know, the costume department, the art department, and Tony's script were such, huge things for me on top of Yorgos's magnificent direction. So I think there's a real feeling of it being a kind of troop effort, and we're very proud of one another, I think.
Is that the most exciting thing about going to the Oscars? Will be sort of that reunion of seeing everyone?
It would definitely be far less enjoyable without it. I mean, the recognition is lovely, and I think all of us have worked very, very hard, and I think all of us have been very daring with our contributions. So to have that recognized by such a body as the Academy is obviously, really delightful. I'm so glad that um, what we were trying to do was interpreted positively. But yeah, it's also, everyone who's worked on it, so they're so fun and they're so kind and they're so mind-blowingly talented. It's a pleasure to be associated with them, really.
And being this first film that you've scored, you're obviously a very skilled musician. It's not like you just started creating music. So what did you have to tap into that was different for a film score than what your typical process is when you're creating music, or was it that different for you?
No, I think part of it probably was the mental acrobatics of trying to forget that it was going to be a film score and forget that it would, be something on a lot larger a scale than I'd ever really played with before. The best stuff came when I was trying to remember, the rudiments of, uh, interpreting the feelings, interpreting the story, interpreting how Bella would have felt at all these points, and just trying to really honestly and incisively portray this emotion. And when I was focusing on that, I think the toolkit I had amalgamated over the years came in really handy, especially as well. There was no set of references. A really important point that me and Yorgos made very early on is, was not to discuss any other films or any other composers, no temp music or references or anything like that. It was really important that everything musically to do with the film had to kind of be ex nihilo, come from within itself. So all I had to rely on was really the thoughts, the contemplations I'd had in the past of how you might portray a certain feeling or a certain emotion um, in an honest and unusual way.
And you wrote the majority of the music before the filming actually took place, correct? So you kind of were basing everything off the script that you read, and how do you build those characters with music before seeing it in that way?
It's a good question. The documents I had were the script, And I also had this really amazing kind of like 200-page book of all the concept artwork, all the stuff for the costumes and the sets and all this sort of thing, which gave me a really great context as to what the aesthetic world of the film was going to look like and how mind-blowing and exuberant all of that was going to be. Um, but yeah, I think a really great part of it was trying to have the sense of empathy and trying to get into the heads of these characters. So much of what I've written so far, songwriting wise, has been very autobiographical. And just spending a while sitting and thinking, what, for Bella, like all these experiences are her first experiences, and they're very shocking first experiences to have. So trying to imagine like what it would be like seeing death for the first time, what it would be like, to fall in love or to um, have an adoration for someone, to feel fear. And I guess part of it involved kind of trying to tap into the memory of early experiences, what it was like when you have those kind of things when you're younger, and like, for example, when you first like fancy someone when you're a teenager, and it's like, an actually real new thing, and having this kind of like flutter and this kind of queasiness and something that's so like delicate but also very powerful and raw, and just ideas like this that I wanted to communicate quite forwardly.
Well, speaking of raw, that's kind of how I felt when I hear the first song. If you listen to the soundtrack, it's of about Bella, and it starts off in this very kind of strange. I don't know if it's I'm not the music expert, so I don't know if it's maybe like out of tuning of the instruments a little bit, and then it all of a sudden builds into this beautiful orchestra, and I think that so perfectly shows kind of Bella's early world. Can you talk about building that song for Bella, and if is that how you sort of worked, was to think of songs for specific characters, or maybe just her?
It might have been more abstract than that, but I think, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of stuff, with the way in which things were recorded or played or tuned or things like that. I basically didn't want something that felt objective and kind of as if you were looking at the world through a glass, and it was kind of like, polished, and it's like, oh, here's a lovely, piece of romantic music to, go along with this person's story. I really wanted it to like feel like it was emanating from the psychological interior of these characters. And quite literally, but in general, Bella's wobbling at the beginning. She doesn't really know how to walk properly. Like verbally, she's pretty far back, and trying to get the balance of something that was kind of, not entirely centered, not entirely balanced, and kind of moving out of these kind of, these tones and these tunings, but still you could tell there was something very important and something very sweet in the middle of it. Yeah, that was one of the challenges of trying to get that balance.
What type of instruments for you worked best for this film, and why?
We played a lot with woodwind. I thought that for so many reasons, different forms of woodwind were really appropriate. So much of the film is about life, not just in the kind of biomedical sense, but in the kind of general sociological sense. And I think that breath is a really great analog for that. One concept we were playing with was the difference between wind instruments that are operated by human breath, like flutes and so on, and wind instruments that are animated. Basically, they have a non-human breath, so like a pipe organ or an accordion or bagpipes. Like, I did a lot of research on different. There are so many different forms of bagpipes in the world. Like every country basically has their own one, and like some of the ones from Eastern Europe, literally they get the carcass of a goat and then just attach, pipes to an inflator, like you're physically holding a cadaver. And these ideas about trying to make things that humans are forced to breathe, it's not coming from a person, it's an animation basically, and then trying to get them to bend and speak as if they were human, I think creates this really eerie, really uncanny feeling, which I employed a few times throughout the film. So that was kind of, yeah, the thing between the wind stuff. A lot of strings. I think texturally the strings were really important. I think a lot of the costumes and the way that you had these like really, glorious and almost kind of queasy, poisonous looking fabrics that Holly, the costume designer, came up with, made me think, having these textures that were like somewhat beautiful, but also somewhat kind of like kind of too much, kind of toxic in a certain way. And then there was a lot of manipulation, a lot of singing and voice manipulation, which again I think is really related to what Godwin Baxter's mission was in the film and what Bella basically is, this kind of, you know, manipulated version of a human, and how beautiful that can be as well as how scary it can be. And generally every instrument as well went through some amount of very precise surgical processing in order to achieve this slightly off feeling.
One of my favorite scenes that people are talking about is that Portuguese dance, and Bella's dancing. Talk about how you composed that. What did you know about that scene, or what were you thinking while you were composing that piece? Because that really stands out as something different in the film. It's really its own sort of sound.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good question to think about what the actual diegetic music in the film was going to sound like by comparison to the score proper. It's a really important point of the story, and you could tell just from the script that this is, you know, one of the moments where you can see Bella evolve in real time. I think it's such an amazing scene, and the way in which Emma Stone portrays it is incredible because it's obviously very funny and very, you know, it's a great cinematic spectacle, but there's so much storytelling, so much non-verbal storytelling, and how she almost realizes that how liberated she is physically can be an asset and not just a thing she needs to work on. And also the fact that Duncan Wedderburn, Mark Ruffalo's character, is basically following her the whole time and not really being able to keep up with her levels of creativity. So that there's so much in it. And I wanted, what I needed to design basically was a piece of music that would be rousing and intense enough to ignite this transformation in Bella, but it also had to be part of the world that was less interesting than her. And to some extent, the music almost had to take a slight back foot, and her dancing had to be obviously weirder than the sound, if that makes sense. So something weird enough to get her going, but the most important part about that scene is that Bella outshines everything, including the band.
And when you see that come to life, what is that like for you as a composer? Because you're doing all this behind the scenes. What was it like for you to see this finished product of that Yorgos, when he finally had everything together, and you sit there and watch the film and you hear your music over all the incredible visuals and production design and performances, it all comes together so magically. How did you feel in that moment?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I remember very distinctly the first time I saw any cut of it in Athens, and it's it was a very overwhelming thing. I felt, you know, I was, yeah, I felt very emotional after watching it the first time. I was also impressed by how regularly Yorgos was able to intertwine the music with the sex scenes. I think there's almost not a single sex scene that doesn't have, yeah, something musical over the top of it, and I was really yeah, it was very funny. I love the way in which he's kind of portrayed these things. I think it's one of the most, you know, one of the most interesting thematic things about the film, and I'm really glad my music was a part of it. I think portraying sex not as this kind of like slick Hollywood thing where, you know, it's breathy and it's close up and someone's against a door, like it's, you know, it's dumb and it's messy and it's kind of joyful and it's, you know, stupid, and having, yeah, the music interact with that, it was very, yeah, good fun to watch. Very funny.
At what age did you realize that you were able to compose music? I'm fascinated by music composers because I don't understand the creation of new melodies over so much time, and the ability to do that. At what age did you sort of tap into your own skill as a composer? Did you feel like it was a gift, or did you feel like it was something you really studied hard to discover in yourself?
Firstly, it's a really great question, actually. The creation of melodies and the ability to create new simple melodies on top of so many other ones is it's a great question. There's a lot of very interesting, weird, numinous stuff that comes into that. So I'm interested you're thinking about that. I've played music since I was pretty young. I learned, well, I started kind of doing percussion-y stuff when I was very, very, very young. But like, you know, was learning piano and violin when I was about 5 or 6. And I think generally, I don't know, I've not ever been a great student at school or as an instrumentalist or whatever. And I think you know, I've always loved messing about with stuff, and I've loved, yeah, creating stuff since, you know, yeah, I think since reasonably young. I don't think it's a, you know, it's not a thing I think I've studied for in the sense of like, you know, trying to graft away at it as if, you know, like I was like a sprinter or something, but you know, worked hard on it in the sense that I've always been very moved by music. Great deal of my musical upbringing was in the church, and also listening to, you know, a lot of songwriters like Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen who had a certain attitude to emotion, and it's their own sacred treatment of the human experience. And I think in a lot of ways I was probably very sensitive from a very young age, and the ability to, you know, use music writing to like play piano and try and think of ways in which, you know, you can encapsulate these different things was, I guess it was an instinct I've always really found very important.
Well, it certainly has worked out well for you. And do you expect to continue to do more film scores? Is this something you enjoyed, this experience?
I enjoyed it very much. Yeah, why not? It'd be fun to keep going. We'll see.
Well, we look forward to that, and congratulations once again. Good luck at the Oscars this year, and we'll be watching, of course. And thanks for sitting down and chatting with Gold Derby today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful chatting to you.